Welcome back. It might be a new year, but the trans debate is guaranteed to keep on raging in 2023, not least with news that transgender NHS staff can now treat patients who specifically request same-sex care for intimate procedures. According to a letter seen by the policy exchange think tank, North Bristol NHS Trust said it was unable to guarantee patients would receive treatment by a clinician of the same sex if requested. It also said that doctors and nurses involved in a patient's treatment did not need to disclose their sex to the Trust. The letter was penned by the former chief executive of the Trust, Evelyn Barker, in February of last year. Well, joining me now is Father Ted and IT crowd creator and women's rights advocate Graham Linehan, who went from TV hero to cancel culture victim for daring to suggest that, quote, men aren't women on Twitter in 2020. Well, listen, Graham, I'm pretty sure that history will judge you kindly. But can we get to the basics of this? What are the practical implications of this issue around intimate care? What's the worst-case scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario is that you get someone who is very elderly or disabled, unable to physically protect themselves from being placed in a position that they don't want to be placed in. You know, the thing about this is, someone asked me outside, is this how things were 25 years ago? The law hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is that Stonewall developed a different interpretation of the law and started introducing it to institutions all across the UK, including the NHS and the police force. So it's kind of like, you know, I've said this before, but a soft ideological coup has happened within these places that mean that the normal rules of engagement, where you can ask for, if you ask for a certain sex of a carer, that will be respected. Women can't depend on them anymore. You know, so it's... No,
so you could say, so for example, it could be like, you know, your mother or your sister or your daughter or granddaughter. This involves girls as well, but an intimate medical examination in which possibly the patient is, you know, wearing no clothes, being examined by a biological male that calls themselves a female.
Yes, because
a female patient can request that it's only a woman that sees them, and that will not be granted.
Yes, the patient can no longer be certain of that. I'm sure most of the time you will get a female carer, but there's an element of ambiguity now around the whole question because of the confusion that Stonewall have spread. That make it very that mean that female patients aren't on a sure footing anymore. I mean, there's an extraordinary story a while back of an autistic woman named Claire Dimion. I think actually she might be in the House of Lords. And she requested a female carer for a breast exam. And not only did they not observe the request, a few weeks or months later, she saw an official piece of NHS documentation, and her own letter was quoted inside. They didn't tell her they were republishing it. It was quoted inside this document as an example of a letter from a bigoted person. So even the request is now being flagged up as problematic or hateful, you know? And there is absolutely nothing hateful about a woman who could have been through God knows what, like sexual assault or something along those lines, child abuse. There's absolutely nothing.
A cultural or religious issue.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing.
It might be. And tell me that I've completely lost the plot, but it might be that a woman doesn't want to have a gynecological examination from somebody that identifies as female, but that is a biological man. And at the heart of this, of course, you're no transphobe. I would have thought that if somebody chooses to identify by a different gender, and they were Steve and they're now Rebecca, you're a libertarian like me, good luck to you. I'll call you Rebecca. And I'll, you know, indulge in some whatever you call it.
I have a rule. I will not give female pronouns to a misogynist. That's my rule, and I won't observe their name. I won't do any of that stuff, because so much of trans activism is a kind of a sadistic trolling of women that takes aim at their livelihoods and their boundaries and their privacy and their dignity. I won't respect
that's a
the pronouns of anyone who supports.
What about those? What about the people that feel that they're in the wrong body and they change their name and they dress as a female? I mean, would you not acknowledge?
Absolutely.
If they weren't trolls and they weren't bullies.
Yes, and the thing is, there are so many transsexual people in this fight who are just watching this aghast at what is being done in their name.
Including the world's most famous trans woman, Caitlyn Jenner, who said, and she's one of my heroes, said that biological men calling themselves women participating in female sport is completely wrong and completely unfair. So many in the trans community think this is madness too. And this is gender ideology, which I guess a shorthand for it is that it tries to establish the idea that a man is a woman or a woman is a man, and that's like a biological scientific fact now. And that's what we've now got to accept. That's what you're pushing back on.
Or to put it another way, there is no biological basis for whether someone is a man or a woman.
Right.
Which is a kind of muddying of reality that has implications for the whole of society.
Yes. And it could be challenged by the most rudimentary of GCSE biology textbooks. Given the fact that every cell in the body, I understand, has a gender, has a sex, as it were, chromosomally, very fundamentally. The woke takeover of our public institutions is particularly egregious, isn't it, given the fact that we're paying for this nonsense, particularly when it comes to the NHS?
Well, we're
bankrolling this.
We probably come at it from a slightly different angle. I've always been a card-carrying lefty, and and the NHS and the BBC over here have been kind of what I thought were the jewels in the crown of what England was capable of. But gender ideology has completely corrupted both organisations. The BBC is lying to people, lying to children about there being more than two sexes. The NHS is betraying women by not ensuring that they'll be comfortable at a time when they're at their most vulnerable. I had cancer at one point, and the fear was so great that you really wanted clarity at all times, and that's what the NHS have taken from female patients. They've taken clarity, and they've taken the kind of one would expect to be. At a time when you're at your most vulnerable, to have trust in an institution like the NHS. And you would
hope that there would be some degree of female safeguarding. This feels, in the worst-case scenario, as we started our conversation, it's almost like Jimmy Savile on roller skates, isn't it? I've only got a couple of seconds left. I'll get in huge trouble with Liam. But is gender ideology here to stay? Will we look like dinosaurs in 20 years' time?
No, it's untenable. Unfortunately, though, it looks like, because there's no adults in the room, because Keir Starmer won't defend people like J.K. Rowling and Rosie Duffield, it's going to actually take a tragedy before people realise how absurd this idea is.
Graham, where can people find your brilliant articles on Substack?
Oh, I have a website called the Glinner Update, but I'm also back on Twitter now. They unbanned me, but of course no one reported it.
Back on Twitter. Graham, what is your Twitter handle?
Glinner.
Glinner, nice and easy to remember. Let me highly recommend it. Make your New Year's resolution to read the work of this fascinating man. Of course, he's a comic genius as well, don't you know? Thanks, Graham.